Welcome to PCAT Critiques You, Episode 1. Today, we'll be taking a look at this drawing by MrPsymind and seeing how we can improve it by focusing on the anatomy, form drawing, and perspective. Afterwards, we'll check out the study by Need I Suppose and try to make it more accurate with better values, shadow shapes, and proportions. Enjoy! So I'm roughly gonna just draw her ribcage in, right? Which should look something like this. I've drawn my ribcage a little bit boxy to help me figure out what I want to do. And I think her pelvis is turned this way from what I can see. The greater trochanter is right here. Got some butt here. All right, that means the collarbone is right about there. The hand is looking pretty good, I think. Remember, the upper arm and the forearm should be approximately the same length, so let's do that. We can do that by kind of drawing in some cylinders to help us measure. That's usually what I do, yeah? So we can keep it the same length, but your perspective doesn't imply that. You see there's a difference here? However, if I make sure that the perspective of the forearm is correct, I can make it look a lot longer. You see what I'm doing here? So what's really helpful here is you have these bandages, so you can use these cross contours to help you sell that perspective. You can also add a little bit of musculature to the arm, but that's up to you. I will add a tiny little bit. I think the chest looks a little bit off center. Since her body is going this way, and it's kind of like twisting over here because the pelvis is twisted. You want to make sure that this cleavage here isn't exactly dead center. So I'll put it more over here a little bit. So I see that you've done this thing where you can kind of see two butt cheeks, but from this perspective, I find that would probably be a little bit improbable because it's not a super top-down perspective. It's more of a front-on perspective. So I will just make it so that you can only see one. So a small change here. You can't see the front of the pelvis and the back at the same time. Pick one. Exactly what Steve said. So you did a pretty good job on this hand, but this one, you probably want to make sure that the hypothenar eminence is a little more visible. That's like the meat near your pinky finger. So if you want to keep her arms thin, you can, but adding a few curves here and there to just imply that the muscles are present will go a really long way. See, because instead of having it stick straight, I'm adding a slight curve over here to indicate the biceps, right? I'm not saying you have to sketch in every single muscle, but just through your lines alone, you can actually say a whole lot. So you probably know that this is the ridge muscles, right? The brachioradialis. So we did a pretty good job showing the musculature of the knee, of the thigh, but I want to emphasize it just a little bit more. All I'm doing right now is working a little bit of more anatomy into the drawing. I am thickening up the limbs a little bit, but if you don't like that, you don't have to. Remember that the knee is bony, so it's better. You can use some angular, sharper shapes here to kind of imply the boniness versus the softness of the body elsewhere. You know what I mean? This looks pretty good, so we're gonna keep this. I'm just gonna move it down a little bit, especially since there's like a slight downward perspective. You're viewing it from above slightly. You'll see more of the thigh and less of the leg underneath, basically. So let's see the change we made so far. So far, I basically just try to fix the perspective and the foreshortening on the arm, and just gave her a little bit more musculature. So this is here that looks so far. Okay. Now we're just gonna move this kind of boob slit to the center. There's a lot of stuff in the way, so that might be difficult, but I'll try. Just kind of put it more in the center of her body. Finally, the hands. Oh, I hate doing hands, but I'll do my best. Something a little simpler like that could work. All right, so something like this, I think. You could also potentially experiment with more exciting hair shapes here. Like, looks a little bit thin, but you can add some flyaway strands and stuff like this to add more excitement to the hair, because hair is just shape design, right? So feel free to do stuff like this. This is a small thing. You can do it if you like. I just generally prefer doing this sort of thing. So, yeah, here it is. Here are my changes. You can see the before and after. Yeah, so 1, improving the form drawing a bit, fixing the anatomy a little bit, or adding some anatomy, and just overall, just making sure the perspective is consistent. All right, here is the final image, and I hope that helped, MrPsymind. It looks like you did a pretty good job on the values here. You've grouped your values pretty well, and the lights and shadows are nice and separated, so that looks good. You wanted to focus on shadow shapes and you're happy with how it turned out? Okay, yeah, that it shows. You did really well on the shadow shapes. Yeah, I feel like there might be some proportional issues here that you might want to get sorted, so let's work on that. So the first thing is that you appear to have the same issue I have, which is you just make the eyes too big, just like I do. You've also made the eyes a little bit too close together, so I'm just gonna do that. I also feel like the value range you have, okay, before I do this, let's go back here. The value range you have here in the face is not quite tight enough. Because if I color pick, okay, pay attention to how much it moves when I kind of color pick between the model here. It's like very tight. It barely moves between these areas. Yours is just a little bit more, right? This is a minor thing, but it could be like a little, like over here, it's about this dark, but yours is like, you got something that's this dark. So you actually want to tighten up the lights and shadows even more, right? So I'm going to do that as well. Like the forehead is not as dark as you think it is. And over here, it's just like completely black. Let's also capture that as well. So you can smooth them out just a bit. There is something I'd like to say about the hair though. I see that you've mostly just kind of like drawn strokes in the direction of the hair. I feel like for hair, it might be better to group them into big value blocks instead. So I'm gonna do that too. Like you don't, like here, especially here, you don't need to make sure that you can see every individual strand of hair. It's okay to just have blocks of black right there. Because here's the thing about light and shadow, right? What defines the texture of what you see is at the edge of the border. Everything else can be very flat and featureless, but as long as your shadow shapes are solid and your highlight shapes are solid, it will look like hair. So it's okay to have these. I'll show you what I mean, okay? I'm gonna fill this all in black and show you. So this black here, it's just black, right? Honestly, it's kind of fine. But if you wanted to make it look like hair, all you really have to do is do this. It's kind of like the same way that this shadow kind of like, you're able to kind of make out the shape of the neck just from the shadow alone. The most important thing when it comes to value structure and figuring out the light and shadow is the border. So if you're gonna clean anything up, it should be the border of the shadow. I know that you can see a lot of small kind of wrinkles right here, so you try to replicate that like over here. So, but you don't need to do that. If you squint your eyes, it just looks like a slightly darker area, so you can just kind of show it by doing this. So I'm just gonna simplify the ear a bit. Yeah, so you can apply a lot of texture and detail without scribbling, by just basically adding little details and highlights. The things I would work on basically is like, you did a good job of grouping your values, but you could group them even more because the value range here you see in the face is not really as bright as you think it is. Also, when it comes to detail, if you want to imply detail, you just need to pay attention to the edge of the shadows and details like highlights. You don't need to spend all this time drawing in every single individual hair or every single individual eyelash. And finally, just some small things to like just check your proportions. Your eyes were a little too large. I moved them a little further apart, just that kind of stuff in general. But overall, you did a really good job.